Welcome everyone to Book Passage Live. I'm Zach Dubuque. I'm your host today. I just want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for being here with us. And I want to let everyone know that if they have questions for Douglas Chadwick today, please put them in the chat in YouTube and I will relay them to him and ask him after his presentation. But today, let me just introduce our host here, our author here. We're here for Douglas Chadwick and his new book, 4/5 a Grizzly. Douglas Chadwick is a wildlife biologist who carried out a research on a mountain goat ecology and social behavior atop the Rockies for years, and has also assisted other scientists studying harlequin ducks, wolverines, grizzly bears, and whales. He's also a natural history journalist who's produced 14 books and hundreds of magazine stories. Many of his articles have been for the National Geographic Society on subjects from snow leopards high in the Himalayas to lowland rainforests and the underwater kingdoms of coral. Founding board member of the Vital Ground Foundation, a conservation land trust, Chadwick also serves well on the board of the Liz Claiborne Art Ortenberg Foundation, which supports wildlife research and community-based conservation programs throughout the world. Thank you so much, Douglas, and I'm going to let you just take it away.
Yeah, thanks very much. And having conversations and doing conservation, I get tongue-tied on that too, but it's really a lot of one of the same thing. So, listen, before I'm going to move to a PowerPoint because I'd love to share some pictures with everyone. But first, I want to share one paragraph of words about what this book is really about. Everything in a natural system is connected. This isn't a platitude. It's the principle that explains how a mineral orb wheeling through the vacuum of space became wrapped in creatures, became a biosphere with mushrooms that glow in the dark, kaleidoscopic dancing spiders, puppies and kittens, 6-foot-long salamanders that both bark and mew, Komodo dragons that reproduce by virgin births, jellyfish capable of reversing the aging process and existing forever, chimpanzees with nearly 99% of the same genes we own, making tools in an African woodland, and so many microbes that they outnumber the stars in the known universe. That's life. And that's the subject of this book is the nature of life, of nature, and how we think about it. It's entitled 4/5 a Grizzly, but it's not all about grizzlies. Let me move to presentation mode here. So grizzlies are sort of an icon for me. I do live in grizzly country. I've watched them from the Rockies to Alaska to the top of the Himalayas to the Gobi Desert, where the last 3 to 4 dozen grizzly bears amazingly exist among wild camels and snow leopards. But the book is, as I said, is not about, it's not 4/5 about grizzlies. And it refers to the fact that I am 4/5 a grizzly, which means I'm also 4/5 a polar bear because grizzlies and polar bears are so close that they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. But hey, I'm 4/5 an elephant and a bat. Well, bats aren't the most charming thing, but I'm also 4/5 a red panda over in the mountains of Eastern Asia. And I'm proud to say I'm about 98 to 99% this chimpanzee nesting in a tree. So those are my kin. There are about 4,600 species of mammals, and I share at least 80% of my genes with all of them. They're identical. And what I didn't realize till I started poking around a little more is that I am also 60 to 65% a fish. I am 30 to 40+% an insect. I share identical genes with them. And if you look at the forest in the background, I am 20 to 30% a tree, a shrub, a plant. I'm specifically 24% a wine grape and about 30% a banana. That's who we are. We share the same metabolic processes, the same conditions, the same molecules that make for the conditions of life. And we are kin. And in fact, I share 7% of my genetic makeup with bacteria. So it's not quite how we think of ourselves. And the question is, why am I bringing this up? And the answer is, I am kin with all life. It sounds a little woo-woo, but it's just a fact. And a lot of it wasn't discovered until recently through molecular biology. But we now know the extent to which we are them and they are us. And it's much larger than most people imagine. And so that's my greater self out there. This is what I call, look, when people are compared to an animal or a plant, it's usually a bit of an insult. We take umbrage at it. It's like, well, we're taking a step down. I mean, I'm no, come on, I'm not an animal, and especially not that animal. But yeah, you are, and it doesn't make us less. It doesn't make us less special, less creative, less amazing as humans, but it makes us more than human. It makes us our greater selves. And we are losing that part of ourself, that part of the living planet, our fellow earthlings, at an unprecedented rate. And I worked very hard to write a book that made it clear that, yes, things are pretty bad out there. But looking for the positive way out of this. And I think it starts with a reevaluation of the big questions in life: is who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What are we? What are we made of? And if we can get past this separation we've created and societies have worked hard to create between us and the rest of the living world, that's a start. So look, this graph is of the living weight of all the land-dwelling mammals. And these are our 4/5 relatives. You can see what it was in the year 1900, and you can see what it was in 2000. And this is the biomass, the living weight of all the mammals. And guess what? 96% of it consists of humans and their livestock today. So when we talk about conserving other wildlife, specifically mammals, we're talking about 4%. And when we talk about compromises and, well, we need a little more for people and let's see how we can fit wildlife in, that compromise has long since been made. We existed once in a world where we never went out into we humans never went out into the wild because every place was wild. And a wild community shaped our instincts and reflexes, our cultural patterns, our arts, our prayers. They were a huge part of our existence and shaped what we are, and possibly the patterns in which we think. And now they're diminished to 4%. What happened? The simple answer is kaboom. We humans arose on the planet about 350,000 years ago. And it wasn't until just 12,000 years ago that the total number of people on the globe hit 1 million for the first time. When I was going to graduate school in biology, wildlife biology, and trying to figure out conservation, I'd say if you can see the cursor, we were at 2.3 billion. And we are now at 8 billion. So the human population has just plain skyrocketed on a logarithmic curve. And look, the tendency in conservation to blame people, talk about our short-sightedness, our greed, our our assumption that we are so special, we're entitled to everything. But look, that's what species do. We compete for resources, get all they can for as long as they can. We did that. We're so good at it that we now number 8 billion on a finite planet. So what was good during all those thousands of years for 800,000 people or less, or let's move up the scale to 80 million, is not necessarily, in fact, definitely not good for 8 billion people. We're changing the skies, the composition of the atmosphere, the seas. We're terraforming the land. And I hit a statistic the other day that just kind of shook me to my toes. It was that the amount of plastics in the oceans will outweigh the fish by the year 2050. This is from a international, as a UN projection, and very realistic. And so anyway, this isn't Earth and our fellow Earthlings and us experiencing a few difficult years or even a few difficult decades. This is our living planet having a stroke. We stand to lose an estimated third to a half of all our fellow species by the end of this century. So that's why we need to rethink who and what we are and what we're doing and what constitutes progress. So in my career, I reported often on what we biologists like to call charismatic megafauna. And these are the big, sexy critters that are kind of capstones of an ecosystem. And if you're saving them, they have big ranges and it takes in a lot of other wildlife. And it's a good way to conserve some pretty big stretches of intact systems if you can. So, a snow leopard would be a good example if you're looking at Asian mountain systems. And of course, whales in the ocean. And I've been eye to eye with these guys in a number of cases, different species. And what strikes me is they come over to study you if you're underwater with them. And it feels kind of like an honor, except for the time I jumped in the subantarctic ocean to find some right whales I'd seen swimming nearby. And poor visibility, I couldn't find them. I ran out of breath because I was just using a snorkel and started to come up, and I couldn't go up to the surface because I had a whale on my head, an 80-ton right whale. And so I'm trying to push it off, which of course means I'm pushing myself down before it just flukes to go somewhere and sends me spinning off into the netherworld. So I got to meet and experience the big ones. And the ones very much like us. I spent a lot of time with elephants that have a brain 3 times ours, killer whales, which have a brain 6 times ours, and are intensely social, very altruistic in their social groups. And it made me think a lot about, our kinship at that level. But I had another take on the conservation of big wildlife and on ecosystems that support us all. And that's because my dad, when I was 8 or 9, gave me a microscope. And I was just a normal kid, I think, playing ball and getting into scraps and horsing around in the neighborhood. And but I looked through this microscope and I saw wonders that I'd never conceived of before, never would have been able to imagine. This is from a drop of water. I would go out in the ditch, or I would go get a pinch of soil from the backyard, put it under the microscope, and the world opened up. And it became more alive in more ways than I had ever thought of, and that I think a lot of people are aware of. And other questions, the more I looked, the more I found, but the more questions arose. This is an animal called, or a protist, single-celled organism called Euglena, and it has characteristics of both plants and animals. It can photosynthesize like a leaf with chloroplasts, and it has a tail and an eye spot and is a vigorous swimmer. Some of them are carnivorous. What the heck is it? And this that looks like a mushroom is actually a slime mold. And the name mold suggests it's a mushroom. It's not. It's amoeba. And it's a collection of amoebas that live singly on the forest floor and then periodically gather into a blob and go oozing, crawling across the forest floor and feeding in with false feed out or tentacle-like projections of themselves out, gathering nutrients, and then they put up these fruiting bodies to create spores and make more of themselves. But it's almost unclassifiable. And so is this. This would qualify as an animal. It's called a water bear or moss piglet, a tardigrade. You can take this thing up into space, stick it out on an arm of a space module, expose it to the vacuum and freezing temperatures of space and the cosmic rays. You can bring it home, you can boil it, you can freeze it, you can irradiate the heck out of it and dry it out completely. You can leave it for dozens of years and you can pop it back in some water and it comes alive again. What kind of animal it is, we do not know, but there's a lot of argument over it. But look, the more you look, the more you find. There's no end to nature. And that was the big discovery, along with one other key fact about life on Earth, and that is that the great majority of it is invisible and that it's everywhere. Now, this is another organic entity, we'll call it, because they're still debating just how alive viruses are, because they have to borrow a living cell's machinery to reproduce. But this is how this Photoshop thing is how we've been thinking about viruses for the last year and a half, justifiably so, except I need to tell you that if you go out and stand in a square yard of ground, or we're somehow on a square yard of seawater, 800 million viruses are going to fall onto that during the course of every day. It's the viruses planet, it's the microbes planet, like it or not. And we have great immune systems. We deal with most of it very effectively. But this is the unseen world again, and it is affecting life in a lot of ways, not just by diseases, but by transferring genes from one species to another, from one individual to another. 8% of our DNA, our human DNA, we have about 22,000 genes, is of viral origin, brought to us by viruses from other people, other creatures. Some of it is what they call junk DNA. I don't know if there really is such a thing because we keep discovering what the so-called junk does. But a lot of it has been repurposed within our chromosomes for other things, like forming the placenta in pregnant women that give birth to all of us. So another way to think of yourself, let's leave it at that for the moment. The other message, again, trying to break down the barrier that we've set up between ourselves and all our fellow Earthlings, and how we view the planet and how we should use it or live on it. The big and the small have to go together. Coral reefs have built a lot of the world. I've been caving at 10,000 feet in Wyoming in limestone caves that there are coral showing everywhere in the tunnels. They're uplifted old coral beds. But a coral is an animal that is inhabited by algae. It shares its living tissues with algae that photosynthesize and provide the nourishment for coral. So that's a symbiosis. That's a partnership. We all know about, or most of us know about lichens, which used to be called a plant and turn out to be a combination of algae and fungus. And as you look a little harder, it's sometimes several types of algae, cyanobacteria, which can also photosynthesize, and 2 types of fungus at a minimum. So anyway, another partnership, one of the most abundant um, organisms on the planet. Well, let's look at a common tree. Well, there it is. We know it. We call it a tree. But within its leaves, which do the photosynthesis, which create food at the bottom of the most food chains, are chloroplasts. They do the job of eating sunlight, transforming sun's energy into food. And those chloroplasts inside the cells of all the leaves of all the green plants are symbiotic bacteria, cyanobacteria, those ones that can photosynthesize. They've been around for 2 billion years, and they got incorporated into a larger cell at some point, and that cell became algae. That algae evolved into seaweed, as we would call it, a larger plant, invaded land, became the plants we know. And so that's the part of the tree we don't see. We also don't see the part that the tree's roots are attached to, and that is mycorrhizal fungi, which spread for, in a big tree, thousands of miles in fine, invisibly fine filaments through the soil, gathering nutrients and water from an area 10 times the size of that tree's roots, which is why plants can inhabit so many kinds of terrain and under so many conditions, from super wet to droughty to places where you wouldn't think anything could exist. That's another symbiosis. It's 90% of all the plants that have been looked at have been found to have these associations. So the question is, where is the individual? You know, it's a tree, but it's more than a tree. And we have to think of an organism more as a combination of creatures. And this isn't a philosophy. It's not a environmental position. It's just how things are. And this is what I was trying to get at in the book. I mean, let's look at ourselves. This is, folks, this is my baby picture. This is a sperm fertilizing an egg. This is me when I was the size of a microbe. I was 4/1000ths of an inch in size. There were amoeba and other protozoans way bigger than I was. But I had plans and grew into an adult with 30 trillion human cells. You're looking at some of them right here. But I have far more. I have at least that many cells, and probably far more of microbes inside me, especially in my gut, in my mouth, on my skin, and all the damp spots. And they are digesting food for me. They are fighting off other microbes that could cause disease. They are creating nutrients that I can't make. And they are putting out hormones that resemble some of the hormones we produce ourselves that affect our mood, and our mood affects our thoughts. And people are paying more attention to their microbiome these days, but there's so little known about it. It's mostly experimental. And you see a lot of crazy claims on the internet, mostly because they want you to buy this probiotic or that probiotic. But the point is that much of what we do is shaped by these partners, and they've been with us and with our ancestors and with the ancestors of our ancestors forever. And within each human cell, not just in our gut or in our mouth, but within each cell, and in fact, within each cell of every animal and every plant, and I'm sorry if this sounds like high school biology, but I really want to get this across, are the little organelles called mitochondria. And they are the power sources for everything a cell does. They provide the spark of life so we can think and feel and move, and things can get done within the cell. It's our metabolism. It's our energy source, battery power, however you want to put it. And mitochondria are modified bacteria that long ago got eaten, probably, at least absorbed by a bigger cell that didn't digest it. And apparently that bigger cell used this bacteria's energy and it benefited from it. And this became a symbiosis that pervades the living world. So they're in us. Our microbes are in us. We're shaped by evolution among wild creatures, from our reflexes to our cultures. So where in all of this is the individual? And where is the separation between us and the rest of nature? And I think we need to, I don't have the answers, but I think it's a whole different way of looking at where we stand in relation to the world around us. And we somehow feel that we've been liberated from nature, that we are so special and have such a different quality of life that we are entitled to just keep using as much as we want, as long as we want. And if we lose these other species, that's of concern to some environmentalists. It's something we can fix. But the point is, it's not taking care of the rest of life and the ecosystems we depend on is not a special interest, and it's not an option. And being interested in nature really isn't an option, because you are full of nature. And I've even heard people say, "Look, I get it. It's kind of a concerning, but I'm just not that into nature." And I go, "Well, yeah, but nature is like totally, totally into you, whether you like it or not, whether you think it is true or not. It's just a fact." And recent decades of microbiology and genetic work have pinned it down to where this is not something to argue about. This is something to consider and take into our worldview. And I think if we're going to save species at the rate they are vanishing, especially the big ones, running out of room and habitat, we need to figure this out pretty quickly. And we need to think about ourselves in relation to nature in an entirely different way. And I think it's completely justified by what we've learned in recent years. But let's look at, this is more familiar wildlife stuff. This is the Serengeti, this wonderful concentration and diversity of species on an African plain. And I've been there, and it's probably the type of habitat in which our ancestors spent a lot of time and probably shaped us to some extent. But my question was, what makes a place like the Serengeti so rich? Because this landscape is subject to droughts, and periodically really severe droughts. And yet it has this mass of creatures. How does it support them year after year and decade after decade? And the answer, as with coral reefs, as with forests, is the little guys. So elephants are, to me, are like people. They live as long as we do. They take wonderful care of one another. They're very altruistic. They have big brains. They have great memories, as we know. And they also can eat up to 400 pounds a day, and they poop out a lot of stuff. And all of that gets recycled by as many as 200 different species of dung beetles, put back in the soil, much like compost. The beetles are aerating the soil, putting nutrients down in it, and including seeds that pass through the elephant and planting them at depth, because a lot of them bury the dung ball that they roll away from the poop pile. I can't believe I'm talking about this to an audience. Maybe people are running from the room, but this is part of the richness of that savanna. It's an essential part of it. And the acacia trees that you see scattered throughout the savanna, they produce sugary tips to their leaves called nectaries. And you can just barely make some of them out, but they're very tasty for ants. The acacia also has these inflated thorns that serve as houses for the ants. And the ants, in turn, keep leaf-eating insects off the acacia. And better yet, as they track across the leaves, they have symbiotic bacteria in their little ant feet that produce an antibiotic and antifungal compounds. And the ants are spreading that over the surface of the acacia's leaves. And then you have the termites, which people know eat wood, but don't actually eat wood. The wood is being eaten by protozoans inside the termites' guts. And it was recently found that the digestive enzymes of those protozoans are actually from bacteria living on the protozoan cell walls inside the gut of the termites. So it's symbionts within symbionts within symbionts. And it's the reason that termites and ants are great recyclers of debris, and they're doing much the same as the dung beetles. They're enriching the savanna at all levels. And together, the ants and termites in East Africa outweigh all those magnificent big beasts that we go to see on safari. And in a tropical jungle, it's the same. So this is the equivalent in the oceans of a wildebeest massive herd moving. These are mobula rays. And this is just to say marine systems function the same way. There's the big guys, and they depend on the rays themselves are filter feeders, and they're taking in plankton, and that would include single-celled algae like these diatoms, which are called algae that live in glass houses because they produce a silica shell. And, you know, the biggest creature that ever lived on Earth, the blue whale, is side by side and dependent on algae, which are eaten by shrimp or krill. And again, it's that connection between the big and the little. It's the system, it's the processes, it's the interactions that make the richness of life. And sometimes we think of saving nature as a list of species, but we don't think of all the connections between them and all the processes that result. That's what is the creative part of life. That's what has to be conserved. This is the other part of the ocean. I just threw it in because I love these. They're called sea angels. And they're actually a type of sea slug, which is not quite as lovely a name, but it's pure magic. And the other pure magic that I associate with oceans, and I spent a lot of time on them, are islands. And there are about 500,000 on the planet. They're only about 5% of the total land on Earth together. But they are the source of wonderful creatures, because when animals make it to an island by hook or by crook, they get washed ashore, they come on a drifting log, they somehow make their way to some remote island. They're isolated, they're small populations, and that's where evolution can occur in a hurry. And so islands are full of unique or endemic species. And a small island will have, you know, a lizard. The next island over will have the same lizard, but it has become a slightly different lizard and is now a different species. And it's just a rich, rich array. And it'll also serve as seabird rookeries, because most islands don't have predators if they're far enough removed from land, and at least mammalian predators, or you know, the kind we think of in ecosystems. And so they make good places to rear young. And seabirds have declined 70% in the last half century around the world. It's a huge, huge loss. And the main reason is invasive species. And the main source of those invasive species, which are primarily rats and then mice and then goats, sheep, pigs, whatever else, has come with human beings as we became more mobile, more craft reaching more islands, and more rats escaped a sinking ship or an intact ship. And they have ravaged these islands. And I'm telling you this not to say, oh, here's another thing humans have done wrong, because there's something very right going on. And it's called island conservation, and it's based in your part of the world, down in California and Santa Cruz. And they said actually the guys I learned about this from and that started island conservation, I was with them looking at blue whales, but they said blue whales are now doing better than species on a lot of islands. And it turns out 41% of the most critically endangered species on the planet are on islands right now. Well, there are a lot of islands, but island conservation started removing the invasives from certain islands and found out, lo and behold, quick, fast, easy compared to conserving species on the mainland. And because most islands aren't inhabited by people, they're limited in size, and you can get it done. And within a matter of just a year, 2 years, 3 years, all of a sudden the air fills again with wings from the birds coming back to breed. Plants that were thought to be extinct are coming from dormant seeds under the soil that the rats had eaten. We thought eaten it out of existence. And so an awful lot gets done in a hurry. And island conservation has rescued more than 1,000 different populations on islands. And yes, there are a lot of islands, but they've done an inventory worldwide and said if we could remove invasive species on, I think it's 783 islands out of those 500,000, we could save 41% of the most critically endangered species on the planet. That's how to save a whole lot in a hurry. And I wanted to make sure in the book to, just show things that work. And of course, encourage people to support them. And if they don't support them, find something else that is equally intriguing and support that, because boy, we need the help right now. All the animals need the help, and so do all the plants. But back to my totem, my grizzly bear friends. One reason I like them is besides the fact they have one of the biggest brains per body weight of any carnivore, and they live a very long time. And they make me feel fully alive when I'm in bear country in a way I can't be elsewhere. They use habitats from valley bottoms to mountaintops, and they're originally very widely distributed. But I like them because they're an umbrella species. They live in very rich areas, intact communities. Saving bears saves a lot of other kinds of creatures. But more importantly, maybe they tell us the scale on which we need to be operating to truly save nature. They did not arise in little isolated reserves or, small discrete areas. They arose in big, interacting, sweeping ecosystems. And that's the scale. If we want to say we're conserving nature, that's what we need to be looking at. So here's North America. And the dark lines are outlining, the hot colors are showing us where the big critters were, the big carnivores and ungulates, from moose and caribou to grizzly bears and lynx and wolves and so on. And the greatest concentrations were in the west and north of the continent. And here they are today, and they're confined to, this area is called the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. It's 2,000 miles north to south. And the idea is where, if you have to pick a place on this continent, would you save the most majestic species in the most intact communities with a wide diversity of other life? And focusing on this And here's the Yellowstone to Yukon. And by the way, the other reason that I use this as an example is when you look at the existing parks and preserves, which are in dark green, it looks to me very much like an island archipelago. When these parks and preserves were created, and the old models, now more than a century old, of setting aside little representative pieces of nature or particularly spectacular areas here and there was a lot of wild land between that and the next one. So the animals could move freely. They could adjust and adapt to changing climates, to wildfires, to disease epidemics. They could be replenished by someone, populations from another wildland not too far away. Now they are increasingly isolated islands in a fragmented and more populated by people landscape. And so the same thing holds. They become more and more vulnerable, and they are more and more likely to suffer extinctions over time. But by connecting as many of the lands in this Yellowstone to Yukon area as possible, and a lot of them are public lands, which already have a modest level of protection, is increasing that a bit. It doesn't exclude humans in any way. This is not a super park. It's just a way to leave room for the animals to move and adjust and exchange genes and do all the things they need to do to keep big, vibrant populations going, if nowhere else within the existing reserves. So they have gone from less than 5% connected to more than 30% connected between 1993 and 2014. So this is another, like island conservation, this is a can-do project. And I find it really exciting, and I can go out and find those animal tracks leading between reserves and say, yeah, this is nature at work. This is what's supposed to be going on. This is how we save it for the long term. Nature can't continue to exist in these separate, isolated refugia. And I say that's not a good recipe for the long term. Things like Yellowstone to Yukon are. And this could be a map of the parks in East Africa or in portions of Asia. It's the same problem worldwide. Need to go big and need to go connected. And then we can pat ourselves on the back and say, yes, we saved nature, not an outdoor zoo here and there where we can go see what used to be, but is no more outside of these little isolated pockets. So that's the message. And the message is you don't have to do all your connections on a huge scale. You need to do it on a small scale too. And this is an overpass in Banff National Park. They've made a number of them. This is a footbridge for four-legged pedestrians to get across that busy highway. It's the Trans-Canada Highway. And it works. And this was a slaughter alley before they put in the bridges for wildlife. And now it's functioning as a unit. The mountains to the left, the mountains to the right are connected, and so are the populations that inhabit them. And the final thing, there are a lot of reasons to save nature. And of course, we conservationists have tried them all to persuade people. It's like, oh, save that wildflower because it may hold the cure to cancer, or just because it's so beautiful, or it's performing some function within the ecosystem that may prove to be very important, supporting a pollinator, something else. But I got interested in the fact that if you live in South Korea or Japan and you practice forest bathing, which is immersing yourself in a green space, often with guidance, but doing it any way you can. If you are forest bathing regularly, you can get paid to do that by your health insurer. Why? Because it is that good for your health. And study after study of what happens to people when they go into when they have contact with nature. And it can be going into a green space and, hugging a tree or lying amid the wildflowers, whatever you wanted to do, meditate, jump up and down. It can also be sitting on a park bench in a small urban park. It can also be looking at pictures of nature. It can be tending a small garden on the porch of your apartment. Contact with nature lowers the blood pressure of humans. It slows the heart rate. It boosts the immune system, the natural killer cells, cytokine release. It just does the body good. It's a rest and restoration kind of process that we all need to counter the fight or flight stress related other automatic nervous reactions we have in our system. So I'm not putting this best. There's because I don't want to get into the autonomic and sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Let's just say we have a balance between rest and relaxation, fight or flight. It worked for our species. It worked very well. Again, there are 8 billion of us, must have been doing something right. But now the average American spends 93% of his or her time indoors in a confined space. That's modern life. Most people in the country live in urban areas, and it's hard to have contact with nature. But like I say, it can be done simply. It doesn't mean you have to run out into the wild spaces, take off your clothes and bathe in the forest. But we do need to think very hard about the kind of environments we're creating for ourselves, because a very alarming percentage of the human population suffers from anxiety and depression and other literally dis-eases. And much of that may be related to the environments we create for ourselves and call it progress. But the nice part is there is a cure, and it may be as simple as gardening. It may be as simple as getting some neighbors together and making a little green space in your neighborhood. The studies show the two really intriguing things going on here, that we can stop arguing about conservation, not stop, but we don't need to just argue about conservation, like save this because it's wonderful, save this because it's inspiring. If save this because you will live longer, longevity increases with contact in nature, as health does. And there's studies around the world showing this. Doctors are starting to increasingly recommend time outdoors for people. And I think this is, well, it's because of the way we're built. I can't give you no one has, that I know of, has a certain explanation for how this happens. It's just that nature, we feel that we're home when we're out there. Our systems function extremely well. And it's probably because we spent so much of our existence as Homo sapiens and as earlier hominids, and that would be millions of years, in natural settings. So some contact with nature is good for you. More contact is better. If we can provide that without a lot of controversy, without big polarized political arguments, in a number of ways, and it's something to think about and something to personally practice. So the last thing I'll say, and you can read that part for yourself. Oh, I don't have a photo of this up, but this is a brittle star larva and an astronaut. Two very different species, both made of stardust and salt water and free floating. Being one with nature sounds like an aspiration. It really isn't, because we already are. Nature remains omnipresent within us. That is our starting point. It follows that the greater the share of fellow earthlings and vibrant ecosystems we usher into the future along with us, the wider the range of possibilities we will discover awaiting us there. So that is the end of that. And I guess I can go back to being here. Zach, are you still there? You are.
I am still here. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I've got some questions from the audience that we want to get to. First, just right off the bat, how did you curate and select all of the photos that you used in your presentation and in your book? Because the book is just filled with beautiful photography.
Yeah. Look, all credit goes to Patagonia, the folks at Patagonia Books. I did spend a lot of time cruising around old bookstores with old books, and new internet sites, and anything I could find, because I was determined not to present nature in conventional ways, because as I've been yammering about here for probably too long, we have conventional ideas about nature and about conservation that don't really meet the facts that we now know about ourselves and about how nature works. So said, let's get really creative so that this doesn't have to be beautiful pictures of, elk bugling in the sunset or calendar art or anything. Not that Patagonia would have necessarily done that, but they worked really hard to find fresh images that told a story. So
they're beautiful. The book is so beautiful. Terry asks, she says, you, like Galen Rowell, her former boss, and Alan Rabinowitz, have been very powerful speakers at the forefront of conservation. What is still keeping you going?
I guess I must be looking kind of old here. I'm a little beat down by the heat. It's no problem. I love it. And I get so much from nature. I just want to give back. I'd like to make it sound noble, like I'm on a search for truth and justice and blah, blah, blah. But I just, being outdoors suits me every which way. I worked for 7 years following wolverines as a volunteer just because they were wilder than wild. And it gave me an excuse to go ski through Glacier Park in the winter when I was the only guy in huge mountain valleys. And so there's that. And I get ticked off because I guess there's that motivation too, because I think the answers are right in front of us. And our societies have worked so hard to separate us from nature. It's just a myth, and it suits us. We're a very self-aware primate, and we do think the universe revolves around us. God, look at how much trouble Copernicus had getting people to say, well, maybe the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. It's right there in front of us. We can solve a lot of our problems. It's not either or, like, I got tired of it's ecology versus economy, jobs versus nature. No. In fact, I live in a part of Montana where more people have jobs and more people are prospering because we have tourism and recreation and all these wild animals for people to come and enjoy and see. So I just wanted to I realized, I know I'm running on, excuse me, but I felt like I do have gray hair. I don't have time to keep focusing on individual species one by one or individual wildlands that need extra help and attention. If we're going to keep pace with the rate of loss, we have to have a revolution in our thinking. And none of the ideas I expressed today are mine. They're not new to science, but science hasn't done a very good job of getting this out to the public. And it's partly because there's a natural resistance in people. And it's why I say being kin with the likes of sea slugs or elephants or whatever, it doesn't make us any less wonderful. It doesn't make us any less creative, any less whatever we think of ourselves. It makes us just more than human. And it makes us human in a way we hadn't quite realized until this new information came out. It's our greater selves. And I think it's just tremendously positive. And if we can think about it that way, we will want to go out and make a world that's prosperous for us and also prosperous for all these other earthlings that we share the planet with.
Yeah, thank you. Another question people want to know, what can they do? I think that's the big question is what are the best ways for people to get involved in conservation, outside of donating? And, if it's donating,
Yeah.
where are the organizations that can be donated to?
Well, I mentioned the Island Conservation and Yellowstone to Yukon. I'll mention one more, which is Vital Ground, vitalground.org. It's a conservation land trust. Its symbol is the grizzly bear because it's a landscape level animal. And in the last 30 years, we have set aside or protected 700,000 acres here in the Mountain West on private lands with willing landowners. So they get paid to do the right thing with their land, which is keep using it as they are. If they're grazing, logging, whatever, just do it in a way that works for wildlife to at least move through it or use it seasonally. But don't subdivide it, or if you are going to subdivide it, let's say where it's going to be, but not, divide the whole place into chunks, because that becomes a barrier to wildlife movement. Anyway, I won't go on about it, but Vital Ground is very good. The other message, I guess, is it really is hard to pick and choose. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but I at the same time don't want to give a long list of organizations. I would just say I'm really big on volunteering, and donating is always needed. Everybody's broke, never can keep up with the opposition in terms of funding and lobbying and all that. But there's also a million places that can be restored with volunteer efforts: wetlands and rivers, forests, or volunteer gatherers. We have a program in the national parks called Citizen Scientists. And it's like, you're going for a hike, have a fun hike, but keep notes on how many pikas you see, because they're suffering from climate change. They don't tolerate hot temperatures well. Or keep track of the mountain goats you see, because we need to know where they are at this time of day or this time of year. And so, I love that concept because it gives people a purpose, but it's not a hard and fast obligation, but it's a way to contribute to this body of knowledge that keeps telling us what we need to do to save habitat and species. And beyond that, go out and plant a bunch of trees, just little things. And like I said, make a neighborhood park. Maybe work with a land trust, a local land trust, make a little more green space out there. And by telling people we're not do-gooders, we're not, I'm not going to show up in my hemp clothes and convince you got to eat more vegetables and more fiber for your microbiome. I'm just going to go out and help you make a green space, and I'm going to help you live longer and be healthier because you can go spend time in it. A thought?
Thank you. Yeah, I love the idea of creating, green spaces with neighbors in cities, and it's, I think that's such a great idea. I think that's all the time we have for today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this presentation with us. I just want to remind everyone at home, the book is 4/5 a Grizzly. They should go out and buy it. It's a beautiful book. It's an enlightening book. It's a fascinating book. It's full of incredible photography, a lot of which you saw here today. And if you love those, there's plenty more in the book that are absolutely beautiful. There's this one sort of circular revolving shot of I believe it's the Serengeti in Africa. It's like a fish-eyed circle. It's my favorite photo in the book. It's so cool. It's incredible. And if you look at the book, you'll see what I'm talking about, and I hope you do. But thank you so much, Douglas, for being here. Thank you for sharing this book with us. And everyone at home, if you like this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see more of our events. Please like this video, and please go to our website, bookpassage.com, to see all of our events and to buy books like this, which is, I believe, linked right in the chat where you can go straight to the Book Passage page for this book. So thank you again.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been fun, and I really appreciate people taking the time to come and listen. And it's a partnership. It's connections between people as well as between creatures. So let's go make it happen. And a good day to all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Good night.